Hi guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to show you how to make this card using our new Hey Foxy stamp set. To color in this little fox, I colored it in with some Inktense Blocks, which is not watercolor, but you can create that watercolor look. So before I emboss this, I'm going to prep my watercolor paper with some anti-static powder tool. And I'm going to stamp the fox in some gray pigment ink. I use Mama Elephant's smoke pigment ink. The pigment ink will stay wet a little longer for the embossing powder to stick on it after I pour some on it. After I pour the embossing powder onto my stamped image, I'm going to tap away the excess and then heat it with my heat tool. You want to make sure that before you apply the heat gun onto your image, you want to let your heat gun heat up for about 15 to 30 seconds. That way you'll get really good results with your embossing powder. Now let's get started with the coloring. I am going to color a gray fox today. I think these are adorable. So I just zoomed in so that you could see some of the coloring going on here. To color in my little fox, I used the black Inktense block, but I added a lot of water to the black ink to make it a gray color. What I also did was I added a little bit of blue to my palette over here so that I would create kind of a gray-blue looking fox. I didn't want it to be straight up gray. I thought I'd add just a little bit more interest by adding the blue. I use a scratch piece of watercolor paper in the corner here just to make sure that I'm fine with the shade that I mixed. And then I'm going to add some yellow ochre color to his ears. I didn't want it to be white. I wanted to have a little bit more of a natural color. I also added some rosy cheeks to my fox. After I finished coloring in my fox, I painted a grassy mound for the fox to sit on. Now, I am a city girl. I don't have much experience with wild critters. However, I just thought that it would be really nice for this fox to be sitting on a grassy mound. And to create my grassy mound, I just blended 2 shades of green from my Inktense block collection. Now that I finished coloring in my card panel, I'm going to get ready to put the sentiment on the card panel. I'm just going to use the tiny hello sentiment from the same Hey Foxy stamp set, but I'm going to use my MISTI to make sure that I align the sentiment perfectly. Before you heat emboss this, you want to make sure that your card is fully dry, because if it's not dry, say some of the parts where you watercolored or where you painted with the Inktense is wet, the embossing powder is going to stick all over it. So you want to make sure that it is completely dry before you move on to this next step of heat embossing the sentiment. If your panel is not dry, you can let it air dry, or you can zap it with your heat tool to speed up the drying process. So before I actually ink up my sentiment, I'm going to prep my card again with my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to use the MISTI to stamp the hello sentiment onto the card panel. I inked up the sentiment with some Versamark ink, which is just a sticky ink which will catch the embossing powder. The powder that I'm using is Ranger Liquid Platinum. It's a gorgeous silver toned embossing powder. I usually reach for my gold glitter embossing powder, but since this little fox is a gray fox, I decided to stick to the silver or gray family for this card just to make it cohesive. After I poured on the embossing powder onto my panel, I just shook off the excess, or tapped off the excess rather, and then I hit it with my heat tool. Again, you want to make sure that your heat gun is nice and hot before you apply it to your embossed sentiment. After my card panel is finished with all the coloring, I need to trim it down to fit onto an A2 size card base. I'm going to trim it down to about 4 inches by 5.5 inches. The original card panel size was 4.5 by 6 inches, because the original large paper that I cut my panel from was 9 by 12 inches. That is the size that the Canson watercolor papers come in. So I'm going to trim some more on the side so that when I put it onto my card base, the navy cardstock will show up on both sides. I just trimmed some navy cardstock, and this is going to be my card base. After I cut it in half, I'm just scoring at 4 1/4. This is going to be a side folding A2 size card. After I finish scoring my card, I'm going to get ready to adhere my colored card panel onto the card base. Now I'm going to use a lot of adhesive on the back of my watercolored card panel because the panel did warp a little bit after I colored it with the Inktense, because I did use some water with the Inktense blocks. The heat embossing also did not help with the warping, so as you can see, I am adding a ton of adhesive on this. Now we're almost done with the card. We just have to assemble it. It took me a while to align the card onto the base because I want to make sure that the navy parts that are showing on either side of my watercolor card panel are equal in length, and this was actually my second try. I edited out the first take. So here's my finished card. What do you guys think? Do you like it? What did you think of the video? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. But I really enjoyed making this card, and it was pretty easy. I really like coloring in these little foxes. Thanks for stopping by, guys. See ya!